Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone." Elise Harper stepped out of the black SUV, the wind catching her auburn hair as though it were trying to warn her. She stood frozen for a moment, her suitcase at her side, her eyes fixed on the iron gates slowly creaking open. Behind them, nestled in the hills of Napa Valley, stood the Thornwood estate, silent, sprawling, and utterly unwelcoming. She hadn't chosen to be here. It was a transaction, one signed with ink and blood. Her parents hadn't looked her in the eye when they told her. Her father had fiddled with his whiskey glass. Her mother had cried in silence, but their words had been sharp and final. "There's no other way." Julian Thornwood agreed. The debt is cleared. So, she had packed her life into a single suitcase. No wedding dress, no ring, no celebration, just a name on a contract and a vow neither of them had made with their hearts. Julian Thornwood was already waiting at the top of the stone steps when the driver opened the door for her. Tall, severe, dressed in an all-black suit that matched the storm in his eyes. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply looked at her like she was a file he had to manage, a task on his desk. Elise met his gaze without flinching. She was terrified. Yes, but she was not weak. He offered no hand to help her with her suitcase. No welcome, no small talk, just a single command, cold and absolute. "Follow me." Inside, the house was a cathedral of shadows. Marble floors, high ceilings, grand portraits staring down from the walls like judges. It smelled faintly of aged wood and something sterile, like secrets buried under layers of time. Her footsteps echoed behind his, each one heavier than the last. It felt less like she was entering a home, more like she was being absorbed into a tomb. "You'll find everything you need in the master suite," he said, stopping in front of a double door at the end of the hallway. She blinked. "You mean that's your room?" "It's ours now," he replied without turning. "That was part of the agreement." "Elise's youthful." There were many things in that agreement. None of them asked if I wanted this. He finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Wanting is a luxury neither of us can afford." And then he walked away. The door creaked open, revealing a vast room with towering windows, velvet drapes, a fireplace still burning though it was summer. There were 2 glasses on the nightstand, one bed, no dividing lines, no space to breathe. She stood there for a long time, her fists clenched, her suitcase still untouched. A part of her wanted to scream, another wanted to cry. But all she did was exhale. This was not a fairy tale. She wasn't the innocent girl who believed love could conquer all, and he wasn't the brooding hero waiting to be saved. Elise knew exactly what she had been sold into, but what Julian didn't know, what he couldn't have possibly foreseen, was that she wasn't a pawn. She had survived things before. Loneliness, neglect, empty promises. This would not break her. Dinner that evening was quiet. The table was long, absurdly so, and they sat at opposite ends. The meal had been prepared by invisible hands. He had staff, clearly, but none dared to appear. She sipped her wine carefully, wondering if he would say anything. Ask about her life, her interests, her favorite color even. But he simply cut his steak and ate in silence. She studied him. His jawline rigid, his posture military straight. His gaze always lowered, as if he were avoiding looking at anything too real. There was a scar near his temple, faded but unmistakable. She wondered about it for a moment, then dismissed the thought. If he wanted to be a ghost, fine, but she was still alive. "Do you always eat like a statue?" she asked suddenly, her voice sharp in the silence. He glanced up, unbothered. "Do you always provoke strangers on your first night under their roof?" "You're not a stranger," she replied. Unfortunately, a flicker, barely there, crossed his face. Annoyance, amusement, regret, she couldn't tell. "I suggest you find a way to make peace with this arrangement," he said finally. "The sooner, the better." "Then what if I don't?" His eyes darkened. "Then you'll find it more difficult than it already is." She stood up, pushing her chair back with a scrape. "I didn't come here to be your prisoner, Mr. Thornwood." "No," he said, rising too. "You came here to pay a debt, and that, right there, was the moment Elise decided she would not simply endure this. She would confront it, challenge it, change it. That night, as she lay on one side of the bed, fully clothed, body turned away from him, she felt him move once. Just once. A shifting of weight. A breath that hitched and then went still again. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak, but his presence filled the room like smoke. Thick, suffocating, and full of something unsaid. She closed her eyes, her mind racing. What kind of man trades money for a wife? What kind of pain does it take to orchestrate something so cruel? Elise didn't have answers, but she had time. And in time, she'd find the cracks in his armor not to hurt him, but to understand why he was hurting her, because no man builds walls that thick without a reason, and no woman walks into fire without learning how to burn with it. The Thornwood mansion looked more like a fortress than a home. From the outside, its stone walls were cold and unyielding, stretching across the green Napa Valley hills like a silent beast. Inside, the air was still, almost reverent, as if time dared not disturb what had been built here. Elise stood alone in the vast hallway, the doors having shut behind her with a sound that felt more like a sentence than a welcome. The space swallowed her, ceilings that stretched into darkness, paintings of solemn ancestors lining the walls, chandeliers that glittered like frozen stars but gave off no warmth. Every step she took echoed like a whisper. No one would answer. She had expected wealth. She had prepared for power. But this wasn't just wealth. It was isolation, weaponized. At the far end of the hall, a woman appeared, late 42nd, dressed in black, her face emotionless but not unkind. "Mrs. Thornwood," the woman said with a slight nod. Elise raised an eyebrow. "Miss Harper. And you are?" "Clara, head of household. You may call me whatever you like." "Mr. Thornwood prefers discretion in all matters." Of course he did. Clara gestured toward the grand staircase. "I'll show you to your room." They walked in silence, Elise trailing her fingers along the banister. Cool iron, carved with vines and thorns. The house didn't try to comfort. It challenged. Every corridor felt like it was testing her, asking, "How long before you break?" When Clara opened the door to the master suite, Elise froze. It was beautiful, elegant, soft tones of ivory and gold, a balcony that overlooked the endless vineyards, sheer curtains dancing in the afternoon breeze. But in the center stood one single bed, large, made with precision, and next to it, a man's jacket, neatly folded Julian's. She turned sharply. "I'll be staying here?" Clara nodded. "This is the master suite." "As agreed. And there's no guest room? Separate quarters?" The woman hesitated, then answered with professional distance. "Mr. Thornwood made it clear. You are his wife. You will share his space." Elise let out a bitter breath. "Tell him I'll share the space, not the bed." Clara didn't flinch. "I'll deliver the message." When the door closed behind her, Elise stood in the center of the room, suddenly aware of how loud silence could be. The bed, the balcony, the closet filled with designer dresses, everything screamed luxury. But the air felt like chains. She opened the closet, brushing her fingers along the fabrics. Silk, lace, velvet, all beautiful, all chosen without her. That was the theme here. Everything provided, nothing asked. In the bathroom, she found gold fixtures and warm lights, but the mirror reflected someone she barely recognized. Her eyes, once bright with dreams, were now guarded, not broken, but guarded, like someone who had learned not to trust beauty without purpose. As sunset crept through the window, she changed into jeans and a soft gray sweater, her own clothes, and stepped onto the balcony. From there, the land stretched like a painting, endless vineyards kissed by golden light, wind rustling through the leaves. It should have been peaceful. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it reminded her of a cage, so large you almost forget you're locked inside. She didn't hear him approach. "You don't like the room?" His voice was low, rough from disuse. She turned slowly to see Julian standing just inside the doorway, still in his black suit, shirt collar open, no tie. "I didn't say that," she replied calmly. "It's beautiful. Just not mine." He stepped closer, his eyes unreadable. "Everything here is yours now." She crossed her arms. "Except the choice to be here." That made something flicker in his gaze. Anger? Guilt? He didn't respond. He simply walked past her, picked up a decanter of whiskey from the side table, and poured himself a drink. She watched him. He looked like power carved into flesh. Sharp jaw, shoulders tense, eyes always calculating. But there was something off, a restlessness, like a man being chased by his own shadow. "I'm not going to sleep with you," she said suddenly, her voice calm but cutting. He sipped his drink, not looking at her. "Noted. And I'm not going to play house. Smile at parties. Pretend this is normal." "Also noted." The silence stretched again, heavy as lead. She leaned against the balcony railing, her back to him. "Do you always keep your prisoners in luxury?" He didn't answer right away. Luxury is just silence dressed in gold. That made her pause. She turned to face him. So, this isn't about comfort. It's about control. He met her eyes. Everything is about control, Elise. You'll learn that. No, she said, stepping closer. What I'm learning is that you think you can buy compliance. That you can dress pain in silk and call it safety. His grip on the glass tightened. She smiled, not kindly. But here's the thing, Mr. Thornwood. You can dress me up, lock me in a mansion, but I still have a mind, a voice, a spine, and no contract can take that away from me. He didn't yell, didn't move, but his voice dropped an octave. You're playing a dangerous game, and you're mistaking fire for obedience, she replied. Good night. She brushed past him and closed the bathroom door behind her with finality. For the first time since arriving, she locked it. Inside, she slid down the wall, knees pulled to her chest. The room smelled of lavender and expensive soaps, but her heart raced like a trapped animal. She had stood her ground. She had faced the dragon. But now, behind closed doors, she let the tears come not out of fear, out of mourning for the version of herself that once believed love was the only thing she'd ever give away freely. Outside, Julian remained standing where she left him, his glass empty, his eyes on the door. She had rattled something in him, not fear, not desire, but memory. The morning sun stretched golden arms across the vineyards. But the warmth never quite made it into the house. Elise stood barefoot by the window, sipping coffee from a porcelain cup she didn't choose. The silk robe she wore clung to her figure like liquid moonlight. Also not chosen. It had been hanging in the closet, neatly pressed, like everything else here. Curated, luxurious, and void of consent. She had barely slept. Julian had stayed on his side of the bed, unmoving, unreadable. The silence between them had been heavy, but it wasn't the kind that comforted. It was the kind that whispered threats beneath the breath. She turned from the window and headed toward the pool. If she was going to be trapped here, she'd at least take ownership of her cage. On her way out, she paused by the mirror. Her reflection looked calm, too calm, but her eyes betrayed her. Bold, defiant, and a little reckless. She grabbed a red bikini from her suitcase, not one of the ones Clara had laid out for her. She chose this one. It was unapologetic. It was hers, and she had every right to wear it. The pool was nestled between high hedges and olive trees, private but open to the sunlight. She stretched out on a lounge chair, her skin warming under the California sun, eyes closed, trying to remember what freedom felt like. And then, his shadow long, still, uninvited. She opened her eyes and found Julian standing near the edge of the pool, arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. His eyes did the speaking and the judging. That's not appropriate, he said finally, his voice clipped. Elise raised her eyebrows. For what? Sunlight. For a wife. He clarified. Not in this house. She sat up slowly. You didn't buy a nun, Mr. Thornwood. You bought a woman, and this woman wears what she damn well pleases. His nostrils flared slightly. This isn't a matter of fashion, Elise. It's a matter of respect. Her laugh was soft but sharp. Respect? From the man who bought my signature like cattle at an auction? You're not a prisoner, he said, his voice cold. No, she agreed. I'm a possession. Muchlasia. He took a step closer, and though his tone was level, there was an edge beneath it. I'm trying to make this tolerable. By controlling my body, she snapped, by deciding what I wear, where I sleep. What next, Julian? My words? My thoughts? You're twisting this. No, she said, rising to her feet, facing him eye to eye. I'm unmasking it. For a long, taut second, neither of them moved, and then something cracked not between them. Within him, he looked away, as if trying to swallow something bitter. This isn't easy for me either, he murmured. Elise tilted her head. Good. Maybe that means you still feel something. He met her gaze again, this time not with anger but something stranger, a flicker of confusion, maybe even regret. It passed too quickly to catch. You'll change before lunch, he said, turning to leave. She called after him. And if I don't? He paused. Then you'll make this house smaller than it already feels. And with that, he disappeared behind the glass doors, leaving her standing there in the sunlight, heart pounding not in fear, but in fury. Later, back inside, Clara found her in the library, barefoot, flipping through books with a glass of wine in her hand. The chef asked if you'd be joining Mr. Thornwood for lunch, Clara said gently. Elise didn't look up. Is the bikini still an issue? I wouldn't know, Clara replied, but he hasn't eaten either. Elise exhaled through her nose. Let him starve, Clara. When she arrived at the dining room, still in the bikini but now with a silk robe loosely tied over it, he was already there, waiting, not eating, just waiting. She sat at the far end of the table again. They said nothing. The meal arrived. Chicken piccata, roasted vegetables, everything plated to perfection. Elise took one bite, then another, feeling the tension simmering like a second sauce on the table. He finally broke the silence. "You think I enjoy this?" She looked up, unblinking. "I think you enjoy control." He set his fork down. "I had to earn that. Every ounce of it. Nothing was handed to me, except me," she said. His jaw clenched. "I didn't ask for this," he said tightly. "I didn't want a wife." "Then you should have said no when my father offered me like a gift basket." He stood up abruptly. The chair screeched. "You have no idea what I've lost." Elisa stood too. "Then tell me." That stopped him. She hadn't meant to yell, but it had spilled out years of being silenced, ignored, redirected. He didn't respond. And he didn't leave either. And something about that was more vulnerable than anything else he'd done. They stood there, across the table. Not as enemies, not quite as strangers, but something tangled in between. And for the first time, she didn't want to win the argument. She just wanted the truth, but he walked away without offering it. Later that evening, alone in the library, she found a photo album tucked behind a row of leather-bound classics, dusty, unopened, out of place in such a curated home. She opened it. There was a picture of Julian, the 17th of maybe 18, standing with a girl on a motorcycle. Her smile was sunlight. His arm was around her like she was everything. On the back of the photo, a name in fading ink. Lily. Elise traced the letters with her fingertip, the realization blooming in her chest like a bruise. So, there was a story. There always is. She closed the album slowly, holding it against her heart, and whispered to no one. "What happened to you?" That night, the mansion slept, but Elise did not. The silence was heavier than usual. No footsteps in the halls, no wind brushing through the curtains, no murmurs from distant rooms, just the ticking of a clock on the wall, reminding her that time moved forward even when hearts stood still. She couldn't get the image out of her head. The photograph. The boyish version of Julian. The girl beside him. All brightness and wild energy. Lily. The name felt too soft for this place, too alive for a man like Julian. She needed answers not to justify what he'd done, but to understand what had been done to him. With the house blanketed in shadows, she moved barefoot down the corridor, careful not to wake anyone. Every creak in the wooden floor echoed like a secret being spilled. Her fingers grazed the walls as she walked, like she was trying to feel the pulse of the house and maybe the ghost of who he used to be. She found the door partially open his study. Inside, the only light came from a single lamp on the corner of the desk. Julian sat in the armchair, one leg crossed over the other. A glass of bourbon untouched in his hand. He didn't react when she entered. "You should be asleep," he said, not looking at her. She stepped in anyway. "So should you." Silence. Then he spoke, voice like gravel. "Couldn't." She walked over slowly, her arms folded, robe trailing behind her like smoke. "I found the album," she said carefully, watching his reaction. He didn't flinch. "Lily," she added. Softer now. Still nothing, but his hand tightened around the glass. Elise didn't push. She just sat down in the chair across from him, drawing her knees up, curling into herself not to be small, but to be safe. "Do you want to talk about her?" He took a long breath, exhaled. "She died when we were 17. The words dropped between them like cold stones into deep water. "She was on the back of my motorcycle," he continued. Eyes fixed on a spot in the air. "We were at a red light, laughing about something. I remember I had my hand on her knee." His jaw clenched. Then everything went white. Elise held still, not blinking. "There was a car," he said. "Drunk driver. A couple coming from a party. They ran the light, hit us at full speed." Her breath caught. "Julian." He shook his head once, sharply. "She died instantly. I woke up 2 days later. Broken ribs, collapsed lung, dislocated shoulder." A bitter laugh escaped him. But alive, she felt something heavy settle in her chest. He turned to her, eyes darker than she'd ever seen. "Do you know who was behind the wheel?" She swallowed. She didn't want to ask, but she had to. "Who?" "Your parents." The room blurred for a second. "My what?" He nodded once. "Robert and Eleanor Harper. Your mother was driving. Your father was too drunk to stop her." The silence now wasn't just heavy. It was suffocating. Elise stared at him. feeling every part of her reality tilt beneath her feet. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Of course not," he said coldly. "Your family buried it, paid their way through it, fled to another state, changed jobs, never went to prison. The justice system did what it always does for the rich and white." His voice dripped venom. They walked away. Elise couldn't breathe. She stood up abruptly, pacing now, trying to make sense of the storm inside her. "I was a child when that happened. I didn't even know her name." "I know," he said, eyes following her movements. "I never planned to meet you. Never planned this." She turned to him, voice shaking. "Then why? Why now? Why marry me? Why pull me into your grief like this?" He didn't answer right away, then softly, "Because you have her face." That stopped her. "What?" "You look nothing like your mother," he said. "But Lily, you have her eyes, her smile, her fire." Elise sank into the chair again, as if the weight of his words pressed her back down. So, all of this, was revenge? His silence was the only confirmation she needed. She stared at him for a long time, trying to find something, anything, that made sense. Then she whispered, "I didn't take her from you." "No," he said, his voice breaking for the first time. "But you're the only piece of them I could reach." There it was, the truth. Ugly, honest, human. "I was grieving," he said, but grief turned to rage. And rage needed a target. Her eyes stung, not with sorrow, but fury. "You tied me to your hate," she said, voice like ice. "You let me believe I was here because of a contract, but you were punishing me." He nodded. "Yes." She stood again, shaking her head in disbelief. "You're not a monster, Julian. But you did something monstrous." His voice cracked. "I know." They stood there, neither moving. Elise's mind was spinning, but somewhere beneath the chaos, a strange calm was settling. A terrible truth was still better than a beautiful lie. "I should hate you," she said. "You probably will." She turned to leave, paused at the door. "I'm not them," she whispered. And before he could answer, she was gone. Back in her room, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared out the window, letting the truth settle inside her like cold ash. He was broken long before she arrived, but now she had a choice. To run from his ruins or learn why part of her wanted to stay and witness the rebuilding. The plan wasn't flawless, but neither was she, and for once, Elise didn't care about perfection. She just needed out. The weight of Julian's confession still clung to her skin like smoke. Every corridor in that mansion now echoed with Lily's name. Every glance from him felt like a ghost's breath. She hadn't spoken to him since that night, and he hadn't tried not once. "So à tout, certainement, barefoot and shaking, she crept past the bedroom door. The estate was still, the lights dimmed to their midnight hue. Clara had long since disappeared into the staff wing. Cameras followed her steps. She knew that, but she also knew the grounds were vast, and no amount of wealth could monitor every corner, every second. She'd mapped it in her mind over the last week. The broken panel in the east garden, the path that ran behind the olive grove, the opening in the hedge that led to a dirt road. All she needed was 20 minutes, and she could start being herself again. Her heart pounded against her ribs like fists against a locked door. With each step into the damp grass, with each breath of freedom-tinted air, the mansion shrank behind her, becoming what it truly was, a beautiful prison. Then, a voice low, angry, and too close. "Where do you think you're going?" Elise spun around, her lungs collapsing. "Julian." He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. He was dressed in black again, but this time not tailored, no suit, no tie, just a t-shirt and sweatpants. Raw, real, and far more terrifying. "How long have you been watching me?" she demanded. "Long enough." His voice wasn't just cold. It was betrayed. "You said I wasn't a prisoner," she hissed. "I lied." There was no malice in his tone, no venom, just brutal, unvarnished truth. "You don't get to do that," she said, backing away. "You don't get to chain me to your grief and then trap me here." "I didn't chain you," he growled, stepping forward. "I tethered you to something that was already broken." "Well, congratulations," she snapped. "You've succeeded. I'm broken now too." That stopped him, only for a second. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and what he saw in her eyes made him flinch. Not fear, not hatred, but dignity, still burning. Elise clenched her fists. "You want to punish me? Fine, but don't pretend this is about justice. You needed someone to suffer with you, so you chose me." Julian took a breath, and for the first time in weeks, his voice softened. "I chose you because I couldn't forget her. And then I couldn't stop seeing you." Her throat tightened. "Do you know what it's like," he continued, "to wake up every day next to someone who looks like the only person you ever loved, only to remember it isn't her?" She didn't answer, because, yes, she knew what it was like to wake up in a life that didn't belong to her. "I thought I could handle it," he admitted, stepping closer. "But you weren't what I expected." She swallowed hard. "Because I didn't break." "No," he said quietly. "Because you made me feel again." He reached out, not to grab her, not to trap her, but gently, fingers brushing the back of her hand. She pulled away. "Feeling doesn't undo what you've done," she whispered. "You used me, Julian." "I know. And I'm still here," she said, eyes gleaming. "Not because I forgive you, but because I deserve answers. And you owe them." His jaw trembled. "Ask." She stepped closer now, standing toe-to-toe with him beneath the pale glow of the garden lamps. "Did you ever mean to let me go?" He looked at her like a man watching the tide pull away his last lifeline. "No." There it was, the full truth, laid bare like a wound. She nodded, the silence between them now louder than any scream. "I can't stay in a house where I'm nothing but a reflection of your past," she said. "Then let me change that," he pleaded. Her heart squeezed painfully because part of her wanted to believe him. But trust doesn't rise from ashes. It's built, brick by bleeding brick. "Words won't fix this," she murmured. "I'll give you more than words," he said. And suddenly, too suddenly, he dropped to his knees, not in surrender, not in weakness, but in reckoning. "I lost Lily," he said, voice cracking. "And instead of grieving, I created a cage for someone who had nothing to do with her death. I let my rage become my compass, and I led myself straight into hell." She stared down at him, stunned. "I don't want to control you anymore," he whispered. "I want to understand you." A long pause, and then, "But I don't know how." Elise's heart felt like it was being pulled in two directions, one toward the past, and one toward the man kneeling before her, raw and ruined. She didn't forgive him, not yet, but she saw the crack, and light was seeping through. The invitation had arrived in a black envelope, hand-delivered by Clara, a charity gala in San Francisco, hosted by one of Julian's associates, formal, press expected, presence mandatory. Elise stared at the embossed lettering for a long time before setting it down. "Do I have to go?" she asked. Clara hesitated. "Mr. Thornwood said, you're to accompany him." Of course he did. Elise walked to the closet, knowing it had already been prepared. Dresses, shoes, jewelry, all selected without her expensive, flawless, empty, but tonight she had a different idea. She waited until the staff had left, waited until the sky bled into dusk. Then she unzipped a hidden compartment in her suitcase, the one thing she'd brought from her old life that no one else had touched, a red dress. Not just red scarlet, it clung to her like war paint. Low cut, backless, with a slit high enough to provoke and defy. She had bought it a year ago, and never dared wear it, not to a date, not to a party. But now was perfect. Because tonight wasn't about fitting in, it was about setting something on fire. When Julian saw her descend the staircase, he stopped breathing. The room didn't go quiet, he did. She walked slowly, each step deliberate, every inch of exposed skin. A challenge. He didn't speak until she stood before him. "That dress," he said, voice tight, "is not appropriate for this event." She tilted her head, a wicked smile playing on her lips. "Then it's perfect. This isn't a game, Elise." She leaned in, just enough to make his jaw clench. "No, this is a battle, and I don't lose battles." His eyes dropped to her hips, then back to her face. He looked unhinged, like a man on the edge of control. "You're doing this to provoke me." "I'm doing this," she said, brushing past him, "because I can." The ride to the event was silent. His hand rested in a fist on his knee the entire time. Her presence beside him was a threat wrapped in silk. The tension was no longer cold, it was molten, dangerous. At the gala, the flash of cameras exploded around them. Julian put a hand on her back, light but possessive. She didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled wider, waved, and leaned into his side, as though she were perfectly content in this twisted fairy tale. He was stiff, distracted, burning, and that was exactly what she wanted. For once, he would feel the cage. Inside the ballroom, people greeted them with admiration and whispers. Men glanced twice at her. Women envied the way she glowed. Julian's grip on her waist tightened with each passing hour, his jaw ticking every time she laughed at someone else's joke. He didn't say a word, but his silence was deafening. When the evening ended, and the car pulled back through the gates of the mansion, Elise stepped out first. She didn't wait for him. She climbed the stairs slowly, letting the train of her dress glide behind her like blood on marble. Inside the suite, she kicked off her heels, unzipped the side of the gown halfway, and stood before the mirror, back exposed, and that's when she felt it, the heat of him behind her. She met his reflection in the mirror. His eyes were wild, no longer guarded, no longer cold. Something had cracked open. "I told you not to wear that," he said, voice rough. "You don't get to tell me who to be," she replied, not turning. He stepped closer. "You knew what you were doing." "I did," she whispered, and then he snapped. In one movement, he grabbed the sides of the dress and ripped it down her body. The sound of silk tearing echoed like thunder in the still room. But Elise didn't scream. She didn't cower. She stood taller, naked now save for her pride. She turned slowly to face him, her voice a calm flame. "You can take the dress, Julian, but not me." His breath caught. There was no fear in her eyes, only power. She had never looked more like Lily, and yet nothing like her, because Lily was his past. Elise was his reckoning. His hand hovered at her waist, trembling. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, eyes searching hers. "Then don't," she replied, softer now. "Let go." He stepped back, not in defeat, in surrender. The silence that followed was heavier than desire. It was truth. Elise picked up the remains of the dress, walked past him, and disappeared into the bathroom without another word. She didn't lock the door, but she didn't open it either. Inside, she stood beneath the soft light, letting the water from the sink run over her wrists, trying to calm the electricity in her veins. What had just happened wasn't about sex. It was about power, control, boundaries, and for the first time since arriving, she knew she had set the terms. Back in the bedroom, Julian sat at the edge of the bed, hands clasped, face in his palms. He hadn't expected her to fight back, but she had, not with screams, not with weakness, but with presence. And it terrified him more than anything ever had. For 2 days, they didn't speak. The house returned to its silence, but this time, it wasn't the kind that smothered, it was the kind that waited. The air between Elise and Julian was charged, like the pause before thunder. And still, neither of them made a move. Elise wandered the halls like a ghost in her own skin. She read books in the library she couldn't finish, drank tea that turned cold in her hands, slept facing the edge of the bed, her back to the man who had once tried to own her, then almost unraveled before her. But she hadn't forgotten the look on his face, not when she stood bare and unbroken, not when he let go. She hadn't expected that. She didn't know what to do with it, so she stayed quiet until the garden. It was late afternoon. The sun was just beginning to slip behind the vineyards, casting golden fingers across the rose bushes. She needed air, space, something living. She walked barefoot onto the stone path, feeling the cool earth steady her heartbeat. The silence here felt softer, more forgiving. She was kneeling by a lavender bush, inhaling deeply when it happened. Her ankle twisted on a loose stone. A sharp cry escaped her lips as she collapsed into the grass. The pain was immediate and hot, radiating up her calf. She gritted her teeth, trying not to scream again, but her hands trembled as she reached for her foot. Then, footsteps fast, urgent, and suddenly, Julian was beside her. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He knelt and lifted her ankle into his lap with gentle hands, inspecting the swelling. "It's twisted," he said, his voice low but shaken. "Hold still." She blinked at him. "How did you—" "I was watching from the window," he said, not looking up. "I saw you fall." His hands moved carefully, checking for fractures, adjusting the pressure with surprising care. His brow furrowed in concern as he ran his thumb lightly across the top of her foot. "You need ice. Elevation. Come on." And before she could protest, he scooped her into his arms. She tensed but didn't push him away. His chest was warm, his breath steady. He held her not like something fragile, but something real. They didn't speak as he carried her inside, through the hallway, up the stairs, back into the master suite. He laid her gently on the bed, then disappeared, returning minutes later with a cold compress and a pillow for elevation. He sat on the edge of the bed, pressing the ice against her ankle with one hand, his other resting near her knee, close enough to feel, far enough to respect. She watched him quietly, stunned. This wasn't the man who had torn her dress. This wasn't the man who had trapped her here. This was someone else, someone softer, someone wounded. "You didn't have to carry me," she murmured. He shrugged. "You would have argued, and I didn't want you to hurt more." She stared at him. "You're different when you're not pretending to be made of stone." His eyes flicked up to hers. "And you're different when you're not fighting to survive." They were quiet again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of questions unspoken, of forgiveness not yet given, of something like hope inching its way into the cracks. "I used to come here with her," he said suddenly, eyes drifting to the window. Elise followed his gaze. "Lily?" He nodded. She loved the garden, said it made her feel grounded, said it reminded her that beauty could grow even in silence. Ellis's heart tightened. "I haven't been back out there in years," he continued. "Not until you." She didn't speak. She didn't need to. His voice was softer now, not rehearsed, not armored. "Sometimes I wish I'd died that day too." Her breath caught. "Julian, but then I see you," he said, turning to her, "and I realize maybe I didn't survive just to suffer. Maybe I survived to remember." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, she saw not the powerful man, not the calculated avenger, but the boy who had lost everything and never learned how to grieve properly. "You're grieving the wrong person," she whispered. He frowned. "You're mourning the girl you lost," she said gently. "But you're also mourning the man you could have been." His eyes glistened, but he blinked it away. "And you?" he asked. "What are you mourning?" She hesitated. Then, "The version of me that believed love was always kind." Neither of them moved. Then he reached forward, slowly, slow enough to be refused, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "I want to try again," he said. "Not with contracts, not with lies, with something real." "You can't rebuild on ruins," she replied. "No," he agreed, "but maybe we can plant something new." His hand lingered for a second longer before he stood and stepped back. "I'll bring you dinner here," he said. She nodded, and as he left the room, she realized something terrifying and beautiful. The mansion hadn't changed, but he had, and maybe, just maybe, so had she. The night was unusually still. Elise couldn't sleep. Her ankle was healing, the swelling nearly gone, but something else throbbed inside her, something deeper than pain, something like anticipation. The air had shifted between them. Julian was no longer just a shadow in the hall. He was present, in the silence, in the way he checked on her without speaking, in the way he lingered outside the door just a little too long before walking away. And she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was sensing, watching, feeling. The walls between them hadn't collapsed, but something was leaking through the cracks. She got up to get a glass of water. The house was dark, only the moonlight spilling through the tall windows. As she stepped into the hallway, the sound stopped her cold. A crash, then a voice, a man's voice, not Julian's. It came from downstairs. Her breath hitched. She pressed her back to the wall and listened. Another crash, a curse, and then Julian's voice, sharp, angry, but not alone. Without thinking, Elise ran down the corridor. Following the sound, her bare feet made no noise on the polished floor. As she neared the study, she caught sight of the struggle. Two men, one masked, holding Julian against the wall with a knife pressed to his throat, the other rifling through the desk drawers, clearly searching for something. Her pulse surged. She didn't think, only moved. She grabbed the heavy vase from the side table and, with every ounce of fear and fury she had left in her, slammed it into the head of the man with the knife. He stumbled. The blade clattered to the floor. Julian turned in the same instant, elbowing the man back with a brutal blow. The second intruder lunged toward Elise, but she backed into the hallway and screamed one sharp, shattering cry that echoed through the mansion like a siren. Within seconds, Clara appeared, followed by two security guards from the lower wing. The intruders were tackled, restrained. And just like that, it was over, but the air didn't calm. It thickened. Julian stood, panting, a cut on his cheek, shirt ripped, eyes wild. Elise couldn't stop shaking. "You," he started, stepping toward her. "You could have been killed. So could you." She shot back, voice trembling. "You shouldn't have come down. I wasn't going to let them hurt you." He stared at her, like he didn't recognize her. And then, like he couldn't believe her. "You're insane," he said, a laugh breaking through his disbelief. "And you're welcome," she said, lips trembling into a smile. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You saved me." She shrugged, trying to lighten the moment. "Let's just say we're even." "No," he whispered, "not even close." His hand reached up slowly, resting on her jaw, thumb brushing the corner of her mouth. Her breath caught. "You ran toward danger," he said, his forehead nearly touching hers now. "He ran toward you." And that was it. The wall shattered. His mouth crashed against hers like a storm finally given permission to break. It wasn't gentle. It was years of pain, weeks of tension, hours of silence, all poured into a kiss that demanded surrender, and offered no apology. Elise melted into him, her hands gripping his shirt, anchoring herself in the very thing that once terrified her. He kissed her like a man unchained, like someone rediscovering warmth after a lifetime of winter. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her face toward his, deepening the kiss until it wasn't just lips, it was everything. Her fears, his regrets, their fury, their fire, when they finally pulled apart, breathless, neither of them spoke. There were no words for this kind of shift. He leaned his forehead against hers. "I've never wanted something I hated so much," he whispered, "and I've never hated something I wanted so deeply." She closed her eyes. "I don't want to be your punishment anymore." "You're not," he said. "You never were." They stood there in the hallway, with the world still reeling around them, and in the center, just for a moment, there was calm. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Neither do I," she replied. "But maybe we don't have to know," she said, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "Maybe we just start." He nodded once, soft, vulnerable a man, unraveling for the first time in years and letting someone see it. "I should check on security," he said. She stepped back, her lips still tingling. "Go." He walked away slowly, glancing over his shoulder one last time before disappearing into the dark. Elise stood alone, but this time, she didn't feel alone. Something had begun. Not healing, not yet, but something real. The morning after the kiss felt different, not lighter, not easier, just real. Elise sat by the window, knees drawn to her chest, watching the early light seep into the valley. The vineyards shimmered with dew. A breeze moved the trees gently, like the earth was exhaling. But inside her, there was only tension. That kiss had unlocked something, not just desire, not even forgiveness. It had opened a door to a room she wasn't sure she wanted to enter, because once you stepped into truth, there was no turning back. She heard the knock at the door, soft but certain. "Come in," she said, not moving from her spot. Julian stepped inside, a coffee mug in each hand. He looked more human than usual. Black t-shirt, dark jeans, barefoot, no mask, no armor. He handed her the mug. Their fingers brushed, neither pulled away. "You didn't sleep," he said. She shook her head. He nodded, as if he'd expected that. "I didn't either." A long silence settled between them, but this one wasn't tense. It was cautious, the kind of silence that knows something big is coming. She finally turned to him. "I found the file." He stilled. "What file?" In the study, hidden behind the drawer panel, she set the mug down. "Photos of the accident, the police report, your hospital records, newspaper clippings." My parents' name circled in red ink. He looked away, jaw tightening. "Was that your altar?" she asked softly. "Your shrine to hate?" "I kept it to remind myself," he said, voice rough, "of what they took from me. And what did I take from you, Julian?" He flinched at the question. She stood now, facing him. "You brought me here to punish ghosts," she said, "but I'm not their daughter in your memories. I'm just their echo, their replacement, a placeholder for your rage." His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw fear in them. "I didn't know what I was doing," he admitted. "At first, it was about control, about having something to hold on to. But then, you weren't what I expected." "No," she said, "because I fought back." He nodded. "Because you lived." The words hit harder than she expected. Elise took a slow breath. "You loved Lily." "I did. And you hate me because I look like her." "No," he said, stepping closer. "I hate myself because sometimes, when I look at you, I forget she ever existed." That silence returned, but it burned. "You don't get to bury one woman in another," Elise said, voice trembling. "You don't get to make me her stand-in and then hate me for replacing her." "I know," he said. "I reminded you of her, that I had her eyes, her fire." She crossed her arms. "But you never saw me, not until I bled for you, not until I challenged you, not until I saved your life." He moved closer, slow, as if each step might break something sacred. "I see you now." "Then prove it," she whispered. He looked at her, confused. "Tell me the truth. The real truth. All of it, without the walls." He hesitated, then sat down, resting his elbows on his knees, hands clasped, like a confession was slipping through his fingers. "I was 17. We were reckless, happy. I thought I'd marry her." His voice cracked. "But that night, after the accident, I woke up alone. My parents wouldn't tell me where she was. They didn't want me to know she was gone until I was strong enough." Elise knelt in front of him, gently placing a hand over his, "And when they finally told me," he continued, "I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stopped being." Her heart ached for him. I went to law school, took over the company, built everything with steel hands and a locked heart. I never let anyone close. And then, years later, I saw the name Harper again. He looked at her now. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I just wanted leverage, closure, maybe even revenge. But then I met you, and you hated how much I wasn't her. No, he said, I hated how much I wanted you despite that. She swallowed hard. I kept telling myself it was power, that I had control. But the truth is, Elise, you unraveled me. They sat there, two people who had once been enemies, now tangled in the mess between justice and mercy. I want to move forward, he said, not because I deserve it, but because I can't live in that grave anymore. She stood slowly, walked to the dresser, and pulled out the photo album. She placed it in his hands. I won't burn her memory, she said, but I won't be her shadow either. His fingers gripped the leather cover tightly. I don't need you to be, he said. I just need you to be you. She turned back to him. And who is that, Julian, in your story? He stood, closing the album. My beginning. The words stunned her. And then, softly, she said, then stop treating me like your end. For the first time, he smiled, not bitter, not hollow, just real. She stepped closer, pressing her forehead to his. You want redemption, she whispered. Then start by loving what's in front of you, not what you lost. And he held her there, in silence, in promise. In something that felt dangerously close to peace. Elise hadn't been feeling like herself for days. She blamed it on the emotional storm, on the constant pendulum swinging between anger and forgiveness, control and surrender. But the nausea lingered, the dizziness came in waves, and the ache in her body, it wasn't the kind that faded with sleep. She sat in the bathroom, fingers trembling, staring at the small white stick on the edge of the sink. 2 pink lines. Clear, unforgiving, life-changing, pregnant. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The silence around her roared. Her hands clenched the porcelain sink as her world recalibrated. She wasn't ready. They weren't ready. Nothing about this situation was simple enough to handle a child. And yet, there it was. A pulse, a promise, a beginning. She stepped out of the bathroom slowly. Each step heavier than the last. The hallway felt longer, the walls closer. She walked past the balcony, down the stairs, and found Julian exactly where she knew he'd be. His study, by the fireplace, alone with a glass of scotch he hadn't yet touched. He looked up the moment she entered. Something in her eyes must have given it away. What happened? He asked, rising to his feet. She didn't speak. She walked up to him, her movement stiff, almost mechanical, and handed him the test. He looked down at it. Silence, then stillness, and then, slowly, like a breath returning to a drowning man, his lips parted. You're pregnant, he said. It wasn't a question. She nodded, barely. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. I didn't plan this. I didn't expect this. She didn't finish, because in the next second, Julian dropped the glass to the floor. It shattered. Forgotten. He stepped forward and pulled her into his arms, not possessively, not with dominance, but with a desperation so raw it stole her breath. His face buried in her neck, his chest heaving, and then he cried. Not the silent kind, not the masculine, restrained kind, he broke, right there in her arms. And she held him. She didn't ask him to stop, because he wasn't crying out of fear. He was crying because, for the first time in years, life had returned to him. This changes everything, he whispered, voice wrecked. Elise, I didn't know I could feel this again. Her tears fell silently into his shirt. I don't want our child to grow up in a house built on pain, she said. He pulled back, cupping her face, eyes blazing. Then we tear it down and rebuild it. Brick by brick, she searched his face for the man she'd once feared, but he was gone. This man wasn't made of revenge. He was made of hope, and he was terrified. She sat down on the leather couch, hands on her stomach, still processing. Julian knelt before her. No arrogance, no power games. Just a man who had been given a second chance. I'm going to be a father, he said, like he was trying to convince himself. You are, she whispered, and you're going to be the most powerful mother this child could ever have. She let out a soft, broken laugh. You don't have to say all the right things, she murmured. Just don't run. I'm done running, he said. From pain, from truth, from you. There was a long pause. Quiet, except for the crackling of the fire behind them. I need to tell you something, he said. She tensed. What? I spoke to your father 2 days ago. Her breath stopped. He called the estate, said he wanted to speak to me, man to man. I told him no, but then I listened. Elise stood suddenly, cold. What did he say? Julian swallowed. That he never forgave himself. That he's been sober for 9 years. That your mother never drove again. And that he's terrified you'll never come home. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if shielding something fragile. He thinks I'm angry, she said. Aren't you? She nodded slowly. But I'm also tired of carrying it. He stepped closer. Then maybe this child isn't just a beginning for us. Maybe it's a bridge. Her eyes filled again. Do you really believe we can start over? He took her hand and placed it over his heart. I don't want to repeat the past, Elise. I want to rewrite it. And for the first time, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, it was possible that a child conceived in chaos could be raised in peace, that a woman once sold could be cherished, that a man once ruled by vengeance could be redeemed. They stood there, hands intertwined, as the fire burned low and quiet. The mansion was still, but something inside them had come alive. The world changed in the span of a scream. It was a spring evening when Elise went into labor. The vineyard was quiet, the wind soft against the windows, and inside the mansion, everything stood still, holding its breath for what was about to arrive. Julian had never known fear like this, not during business takeovers, not even during the accident that had stolen Lily, but now, with Elise's hand crushing his and her voice laced with pain, it was a different kind of terror. A terror wrapped in love. Breathe. Elise. The doctor instructed calmly. You're doing beautifully. Elise glared at him through clenched teeth. Then you try doing it. Julian would have laughed if his throat hadn't been so tight. She was radiant, even in agony. Sweat on her brow, eyes wild but full of fire, the kind of fire that didn't burn to destroy, the kind that gave life. He hadn't left her side for a second. When the pain peaked, she gripped his shirt, yanking him closer. This is your fault. I know, he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. Blame me forever. Just keep breathing. The room was lit only by soft yellow lamps. The doctor and nurses moved quickly, efficiently. Clara stood at the doorway, silently holding space. Even she, stoic and composed, had mist in her eyes. And then, one final push. A cry, not Elise's, not Julian's, a baby's. The first sound of Noah Thornwood, the sound that shattered the last wall still standing. Elise collapsed back onto the pillows, her chest rising and falling in exhausted relief. Julian remained frozen beside her, eyes wide, as the doctor handed him something small, red-faced, and impossibly alive, a son. His son. He took Noah into his arms like he was made of glass, as if even holding him wrong might erase the miracle. Tiny fists curled into his chest, warmth soaked into his skin, and something Julian hadn't felt in decades bloomed behind his ribs. Peace! Elise watched him, tears streaking her cheeks not from pain, but from the rawness of seeing him this way. Unmasked, undone, reborn. He's perfect, she whispered. Julian lowered himself onto the bed beside her, cradling Noah between them. He is, and so are you. No, she said softly, but I'm finally whole. He kissed her forehead, then Noah's, then held them both like they were the center of his universe, because now they were. The days that followed blurred in golden light and quiet lullabies. The mansion, once silent and cold, echoed with soft cries, laughter, the creak of rocking chairs, and late-night whispers. Every hallway carried signs of life now. Tiny socks left on the stairs, baby blankets draped over antique furniture, and Elise's soft humming floating from room to room. Clara smiled more. The staff lingered longer. Even the flowers outside seemed to bloom faster. But the biggest transformation was Julian. He changed diapers, read baby books, paced the nursery at 2 o'clock, whispering promises and fears into Noah's sleeping ears. I don't know how to be a father, he once said, holding the infant against his chest. You already are, Elise replied. You just haven't forgiven yourself yet. And slowly, he let go of the scotch. He deleted the file of Lily's accident. He planted a tree in the garden, beneath the lavender bush, where Elise had once twisted her ankle, a new life for a new chapter. One afternoon, Elise stood at the doorway to the nursery and watched him rock Noah, his voice low and full of awe. I used to believe I was made of stone, he murmured. But then you came, and now I know I was only waiting for something soft to shape me. When he noticed her, he didn't flinch or hide. He smiled. Come here, he whispered. She walked over, pressing her head to his shoulder, one hand on his heart, the other on Noah's back. In that moment, nothing else existed. Not vengeance, Not ghosts, not pain, just the three of them, wrapped in the warmth of what they had built through ashes, through fire, through forgiveness. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills and the vineyard glowed in gold, Elise and Julian sat in the garden, with Noah asleep in his bassinet beside them. They didn't speak for a long time. Then Julian broke the silence. "I used to think love made you weak." She turned to him, amused. And now? He looked at her. Truly looked at her. "Now I know it's the only thing that ever made me strong." She smiled. "Took you long enough?" He reached for her hand. "You saved me." "No," she said gently. "We saved each other." And as the stars blinked into the sky and the wind rustled through the vines, they sat in the silence of everything they had survived together. The garden had become their sanctuary. It was where she had once fallen, and he had once knelt. Where silence had once felt like distance, now it felt like presence. Every leaf, every breeze, every patch of lavender remembered their story. Elise sat on a wooden bench beneath the old olive tree, watching Noah sleep in his stroller. His tiny chest rose and fell in soft rhythm, fingers curled into miniature fists, lips twitching into a smile only babies know how to make. Behind her, footsteps crunched over gravel. She didn't need to turn. She knew it was him. Julian sat beside her in silence, resting his arm along the back of the bench close, but not too close, respecting space, honoring her rhythm. They didn't speak for a long time. There was nothing urgent left to say, only things that still needed to be felt. Elise finally turned to him, her voice quiet. "Do you ever think about who we were in the beginning?" He nodded slowly. "All the time. I hated you," she said, not with bitterness, but as a memory. "I deserved it," he replied. She looked down at her hands. "And yet, we're here. We're not those people anymore," he said. "You were never just a girl who was sold, and I was never just a man driven by hate." "No," she agreed, "but we had to break to become who we are." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, gaze on the sky turning amber. "I thought pain was the most honest thing in the world, that if I held on to it long enough, it would protect me." She smiled softly. "Pain only protects us from healing." He turned to her, eyes searching hers. "And you, Elise, you didn't just heal me. You exposed every part of me I tried to bury. You made it very hard to reach them," she teased gently. He laughed, a sound that still felt new, but real. "I was scared," he confessed. "So was I," she said. They both looked at Noah then, as if he were the punctuation to every sentence they didn't know how to finish. "He'll grow up free," Julian said. "Not in shadows, not in silence. Elise nodded. "And he'll know the truth, the real one." Julian shifted, placing a hand over hers. "I don't know what I did to deserve you," he whispered. "You didn't deserve me," she said, squeezing his fingers. "You chose me, and then you earned me." He exhaled, a long breath that sounded like surrender. "I used to think Lily was my end," he said. "But you, Elise, you're my home." Her eyes glistened not because she needed saving, not because she needed him to change, but because he had, not for her, for himself. She reached into the stroller, lifted Noah gently, and placed him in Julian's arms. The baby stirred but didn't cry. Just nestled into his father's chest like he belonged there. Because he did. They sat in the fading light. Family formed from fire. The mansion no longer felt like a prison. The vineyard no longer looked like a grave. It was all transformed by presence, by truth, by love. "Where do we go from here?" Julian asked, brushing his thumb over Noah's back. Elisa smiled. "Forward." He looked at her with something deeper than love. Peace. And in that quiet moment, beneath the tree where old pain had once bloomed, they leaned into one another and began again. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is choosing to love where hate was planted. Elise wasn't rescued. She rescued a man who had forgotten how to feel. And Julian didn't just change her life, he gave her a reason to fight for something new. Together, they built a love born not from perfection, but from scars, forgiveness, and fierce truth. Because real love doesn't erase the past, it redeems it.